Hey everyone, so in this video I want to talk about how I relearned a piano sonata using only mental practice. And by that I mean practice using purely the mind or imagination. There's no physical practice involved. For me, it's not even moving fingers in the air, but it is indeed purely mental. So last year, my wife and I had quite a bit of travel. We were gone for a month in Asia at some point, for instance, and I had totally forgotten how to play Norman Dello Joio's third piano sonata. Pretty much. I tried. I tested it before we left. I remembered a little bit of the beginning. It's in four movements, but not much. And I brought the score with me because I have my own mental practice methods, and I wanted to try a pure experiment. And we spent 2 weeks in Japan, and we didn't encounter any pianos I could practice on. Actually, there was a piano at the airport, there was a keyboard we encountered, but I didn't practice. I'd only sat down and just performed pieces. So I didn't actually practice the Dello Joio Sonata at any point. But I did mental practice. I did mental practice with sheet music. I did mental practice without sheet music, and I'll go into that in this video, some of the different variations. And once we got to Shanghai, after 2 weeks, I was able to sit down and perform the entire piano sonata, all four movements from memory. I forget exactly how long it is. Maybe it's like 15 or 17 minutes or something like that. So, and that was quite something for me. I knew that it would work, but I hadn't actually experienced such a pure experiment before because I didn't purposely not play the piano at all for 2 or 3 weeks while I was here in New York. So it was just really cool to try and really exciting to see the results because I knew my mental practice had gotten stronger and stronger over the years. So anyway, on this channel, I hope to share with you guys strategies, thoughts, mindsets, etc., often of my own creation that I hope will help you in your piano playing, hopefully other areas of your life as well. And I have so much I can say about mental practice, but to try to keep it relatively brief, it does have sort of a mystical reputation sometimes even amongst professional pianists, where we hear about somebody who has relearned or learned a sonata or a sonata movement or whatever it may be on an airplane, and then they can just sit down and just perform with orchestra. So I don't know how true or not true some of the details of the story are. I can say that for myself, at the very least, a lot more, much more than you think can be done through mental practice. Should you still practice physically before you then play with orchestra, or you play in a professional setting? Probably. Maybe some other people, they really do just do only mental practice and then they have public performances. I would still prefer to then physically practice afterwards. But again, it's surprising how much I was able to do because I did not remember the Dello Joio Piano Sonata number 3 at all, Norman Dello Joio, that is. And after I did this work while I was in Japan, it didn't interfere with our trip either. We still had a great time. It wasn't like I was doing it like all day long. But I did practice a few hours mentally each day because I'm a serious pianist, and I'm also really passionate about I was passionate about reviving the piece. I'm passionate about advancing my methods to help my own learning, and so we can help a lot more people, my students and everybody else that we're working with. So I still felt the passion to do this, and it was just exciting to see the results once we got there. And I want to show you guys some of my music here. So some of this music, sorry, it's a little bit messier. This is my Bach Prelude and Fugue in G minor from Book 2 of the Well-Tempered Clavier. You can see it's all totally fallen apart. I had a copy made. We put a spiral bound, and then it still fell apart again. So all these different markings. And here's the Dello Joio Sonata. Cover's all fallen off because I've carried it in so many bags of mine over the years and so on. You'll notice I didn't write the complete fingering for this because I did learn this piece at a different point in my life before my methods were as fully developed. So forgive me for that. So, but yeah, and we also almost left this in a hotel in China. We had to go back for it. So anyways, you can see the sort of personality I am with some of the markings and everything you see here. And I just carry this around with me. And what I did was I used my own logical methodology as applied to mental practice in order to revive this piece. And my logical methodology, if you search David Chang logical methodology, if you search David Chang 14 layers of strategy as applied to river flows in you, there are different playlists. If you're on YouTube, if you're watching this somewhere else, if you can go to YouTube and search for that would be great. And I have this whole notational system where, and I'm just going to try to be very brief about this, basically there's the idea of spaced repetition. If you forget and relearn things repeatedly, then that will lead to deeper learning than if you practice it massed all at once. So if you totally forget and then have to relearn a section 7 times within one day, that can be like getting a whole week's worth of practice in one day, you might often hear me say. So that's one thing. And then also you can practice like little tiny sections, separate hands, they can expand, they can then transition into both hands, and then they get larger and larger. And a lot of the time, believe it or not, even just doing little tiny sections to a very, very high quality once from memory, no stopping, super, super solidly, and you use my logical notation, which you can search David Chang logical notation piano or something, and if you want to see examples, or 6 reasons for the power of logical notation, there's also that video. But basically, if you do these little tiny sections, you mark them, you cover like an entire page or a very large section with these very tiny little areas, and then you come back, and the second pass through, you use my rule of expansion. If you search my name, rule of expansion, then you make them larger. The quarter or half measure fragments become ones. You move on, you come back, the third pass through, and you expand them into twos, etc., etc. Like those little tiny areas, they can get larger and larger and larger until the whole piece is then put together. And there's a lot more to it than that, but I'll just leave it at that for this video so it doesn't become super long again. And believe it or not, this was originally created for mental practice, because I'd gone to Disney World with my family, I think back in 2015. It was the first time I'd been away from the piano for that long, and everybody else, if they're on their phones or we're just waiting in a long line, I was like, I might as well practice, because we're not doing much else on this. I mean, sometimes we're chatting, which is great, but other times, if I'm on my phone anyway, I might as well either read a physical book, or I might as well do some practice with the sheet music. Actually, when I was like a kid at Disney a long time ago, I was reading like the Da Vinci Code while online. So I guess I've always been this way. But I hadn't developed mental practice like really at all at that time. I mean, I could imagine parts of my playing, but I hadn't actually like tried to do it seriously. And I was struck by how difficult it was to picture certain areas. I was playing Bach, Busoni, Chaconne, Brahms, Opus 118, the entire set, and some of it was very dense. And so I started thinking, like, how can I make it so it's easier to picture? Because it's like I can picture some parts of the music, but not all. And some areas are much fuzzier than others, right? If you try to imagine certain parts of your music, maybe you can imagine yourself playing some parts, maybe one hand, but other parts are very, very difficult to see. And I believe that, unless my memory is failing me, I believe that's when my logical methodology started developing. So everything, if you guys have seen, if you search for some of those things I'd spoken about earlier, it applies to you physically, obviously, practicing little sections at the piano, playing little parts, and then linking them together. But I believe that mental practice was the original source of this, because I thought, like, well, I can picture little sections clearly in my mind, but picturing large sections, both hands, if I'm picturing like Revolutionary Etude or something, Chopin, it's difficult. And so I had to start small, and then later I realized, like, obviously everything originates in the mind. That can apply physically as well too. And so I started developing all of that, and eventually I developed notation for both physical and mental practicing. And I want to show you guys. So the notation for mental practice, you can see that I put them in these little angle brackets. And I don't talk about this tons. And even amongst my students, I think, I mean, there are only some that have started trying to do this, but it's hard to overstate how valuable it is if you can really like master or get to a high level in mental practice using my logical methodology and mental practice together. The rewards are, believe it or not, that you can start from anywhere in the music from memory. Anywhere that you can imagine, you can start from memory. I mean, music theory and stuff, all that's great, but there's nothing stronger than your conscious awareness of the exact spots that you can start from. You can practice anywhere, like while you're waiting in line, while you're at the airport, while you're traveling around. And you can maintain your pieces, and you can also even learn new pieces, believe it or not. And you can do all this, like, I mean, if you're attending something boring that you don't need to pay attention to, you can be practicing. If you're waiting for the subway, you can do this. It's incredibly versatile. It can be done with the music or without the music, and it should be done actually in both different ways. So you want to do mental practice with the sheet music, with these markings, the way that I'm going to describe in a moment. But if you reach a certain point of fluidity, you can also you do mental practice while you're doing cardio in the morning. So like every morning, while I'm doing cardio, I'm actually doing mental practice, maintenance of pieces. And then you can also do mental practice with sheet music away from the piano as well too. So very simply put, in my logical methodology, a set is any section plus one more note or one more chord. So let me see if I can point with this Apple pencil actually. So when I write a 2 here, this means 2 measures plus one more chord. So like, you know, and this means mental, these angle brackets, unlike physical practice. So 2 measures plus one more chord means I can picture this accurately. I wrote a 4 here. It's supposed to be vertically aligned over here, but I guess because there's so much writing here. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4 measures plus one more chord. That's what the 4 signifies. So if I can imagine that accurately, both hands, then I would mark this over the starting point. There are separate hand markers too, but I won't go into that in this video, and it's not really as necessary for me. When I'm piecing together a 4-measure set such as this, it might be that I play just this last measure in my mind, right hand alone, left hand alone, and then both hands, and then I might play from over here, for instance, the last 2 measures from 1, 2, all the way to here, right hand alone, left hand alone, and then both hands. And then I might do the whole thing, or I might do the last 3 measures, right hand alone, left hand alone, and then both hands, and then the whole thing in terms of mentally imagining it. Now, I know you might be wondering, like, oh, how do you actually literally do that? And I'll explain that. I'll reference some other videos, I guess, in a little bit if you're curious about how to do this. And so, I have played this before. I did perform it as well, but it was, quite a while ago. I forget exactly how long, maybe like 7 years ago or something like that. So I hadn't played it in quite a long time. Or maybe it was 5 years. I don't quite recall. So basically what I did was I started just imagining these parts. Like I would take out the sheet music, and then while we're in coffee shops, while we're at the airport, while we're waiting in line, while we're going in around all these different, anywhere that I could take out the sheet music, in the hotel room, I would take this out, and then I would begin solving these different sections. And that means I'm literally sitting there, like let's say there's no markings here. I would say like, well, how far can I picture? Oh, maybe I can picture like from here to here, for instance, 4 measures plus one more note. And then maybe I can already picture that both hands. But if I want to get this 8, if I want to do 8 measures, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, plus one more note over here. Again, it might be that I'm adding in reverse separate them both for each step using my logical methodology. It might be that I'm doing 2 measures, right hand, then left hand, then both hands, and then maybe 4 measures, 1, 2, 3, 4 from left to right, plus the next note, right hand, then left hand, then both hands, maybe then the last 6, and then the whole thing. That could be my process. And if I can accurately imagine it, both hands, then I mark an 8 in angle brackets, and it should be vertically aligned over here. And indeed, that is what I did for the entire sonata. And so you can see there's different 2s, 4s, 8s, different custom sections. And I forget if I mentioned this earlier in this video or not, but I've talked about it in a lot of other videos as well too. So basically, as long as I have imagined it accurately once, and it's to my standard of quality, there's no stopping, it's clear enough in my mind, I will mark the marking. I don't have to be able to do it on command necessarily. And so then the first pass through all 4 of these movements, it might be that I'm marking all 2s or relatively smaller sets. And for me, I do a global approach, so I'll cover the entire movement. Hopefully this doesn't fall onto the floor. It's a coffee stain or something as well too. Now the next pass through, I might link all of the 2s into 4s. So I literally go through all of the pages of this, and I'll link all of the pairs of 2s into 4s. So for instance, if I had done from here to here, and I'd imagine that, I would mark a 2 here, and then if I did 1, 2, and then one more note, I might mark a 2 over there, and I go through the entire sonata. I go back through movements 1, 2, and 3 all over again. And, when I'm back here on movement number 4, right, Roman numeral 4, at that point, I may then link together this 4-measure set. Because I'd done the component 2s, that's had memory consolidation during sleep. Every single time I forget and then relearn a given section, it's going to make it stronger in my memory, just like with physical practice. And so now I might add in reverse last 1 measure set, which is 1 measure plus the next beat, right, left, both, last 2 measure set, right, left, both, and then the entire 4 right, left, both, possibly. It might not be necessary for me to do every step, and then I might mark a 4 here within the angle brackets to keep track of my work. So that's the general gist of the way that I went about it with the sheet music. I just take it out, even if actually sometimes I'm like standing there, like if we're waiting for like a bus or something, I actually take out my sheet music on the street, and then I'm marking things like while I'm standing there. And I don't care that I'm a big weirdo. So So I'm doing all these things, and it's just the same as if I were doing physical practice. If I were doing physical practice at the piano, I'd be doing these exact same decisions, but just physically playing it. But it's not necessary for me to physically play it because I've cultivated my mental practice skill so much. Now, you might be wondering, why are some of the sections only marked with 2s or 4s and so on? It might be because I've already played this before, but I found that things then very, very rapidly came back. I'm probably, if it's a new piece, I'd have to be even more methodical about expanding the 2s and 4s. So, but basically the gist of it is I did something like 2 measure sets, or their rough equivalent through the entire piece, all 4 movements, mentally, using the adding in reverse, right? You know how, like for a 4 measure set, I do like the last 1, right, left, both, last 2, right, left, both, entire thing, right, left, both, or maybe I stay within both because it's not so difficult for me as a professional pianist. It just depends. So I'm using intelligent strategy each time, and I'm solving small sets, 2 measure sets, 2 measures plus the next beat, and I'm imagining that in my head, and I mark using my notation with those angle brackets vertically aligned over the starting points of each one of these sets through the entire piece. And then I go back and I use my rule of expansion. If you search David Chang rule of expansion, it applies to mental practice. Everything you've seen on the channel in terms of my logical methodology, all of it really applies to mental practice just as much as physical practice, believe it or not. The practicing is exactly the same, and that's really an exciting, like, crazy thing in my mind. That so it was shocking for me when I discovered that too. Now, obviously, my physical methodology, like playing with the metronome and so on, it's a little bit different. But just keep in mind, if you search David Chang 14 layers of strategy as applied to river flows and you, all of that still applies here as well. If you start cultivating mental practice and using this mental practice notation. If you do separate hand mental practice sets, I just use 2 pairs of angle brackets. But again, it's not as necessary for me as a professional pianist. So then I go through the all 4 movements and expand the 2 measure sets into 4 measure sets. I expand them into 8s. I expand them into entire pages. And then I'm able to play the entire sonata in my mind. And then the other component where I don't have sheet music, when we're like running to catch the subway in Tokyo or something, when we're just walking around at the airport, when we are, obviously I don't want it to take away from my life experience too much. So it's like if you were listening to music or listening on your headphones as you're walking around, obviously you can choose to turn the music off. So if I feel like it's taking away from the moment, spending time with my wife or exploring new places, then I'll choose to not mentally practice. But it might add to the moment. Sometimes it's, you're listening to music and it makes the moment more beautiful, for instance. So I am aware of that. But in any case, as we're going around, exploring places, downtime, if it's not convenient to take out the sheet music or I don't feel like it, if I'm tired and I'm closing my eyes, if we are doing something where it's just very difficult to physically take out the sheet music, then I'm just playing it in my mind. When I'm doing cardio, I'm playing it in my mind when we're walking and just getting from one place to the next. And like maybe, we're not having like an avid conversation and we're just kind of like thinking about stuff. I might be practicing in my mind. So that's kind of what was happening. And I know I've mentioned this in a lot of other videos, but I just want to show you guys here. So I've talked about searching David Chang mental practice many times. First of all, so this is just searching on YouTube. The first result is my mental practice playlist. And okay, I will admit, forgive me, I've been very bad about updating these playlists. They're pretty out of date, but there's still a bunch of useful videos even here right now. So these first few up through here, these are actually long form. I should actually add more to this playlist. These are just some kind of like random shorts here. But this explains why I believe it's the strongest possible memory technique for pianists. There's nothing stronger than conscious awareness of the future, like knowing exactly what to play next. It's not like theory doesn't even come close in my mind, and this video kind of explains why. If you want to know how to do it, I go into detail about how to go about doing it, how you can gradually remove the senses while you're playing. And then these are basically like 4 plus 3 plus 3 more here, 10 ideas for how you can start doing mental practice the same way that I'm doing here. And I talk about the notation here. It's very simple. It's pretty much the way that I described here. But again, anything in my logical methodology playlist or the 14 layers of strategy as applied to river flows and you playlist, or anytime you see me talk about physical practice, as long as it it's not talking just about relaxation or whatever it may be. It's talking about notation, adding reverse separate than both for each step, spaced repetition, interleaving. All of that applies to mental practice as well. So now if we go back here, this is when I was in Shanghai, so I made that video there. I mean, you can see me doing all these wacky things. I actually go through examples of me literally practicing these areas, and I mean, this is also old. Like, I've done this on 2 different occasions. This is like when, during, kind of, I guess when the pandemic was a little bit more of a big thing. And, me in a coffee shop and everything, me on the airplane, obviously. And I go through very, very specific examples. And then, of course, there's also long form as well that I was kind of referencing. So you'll kind of see, and then this is obviously me practicing with the score. So I've taken it out, I'm explaining how it is I'm solving specific problems, solving very specific sets, the way I was just explaining just now. And then, so that's already, I guess, like pretty weird, which I love. However, then there's shorts like this, where I just talk about 3 mental practice and was able to practice piano if I want to. And before I kind of made a video like pointing it at my own face. Other times and this is like, I guess, mixed physical and mental practice, which is kind of interesting. This is before I got on the plane. I mean, I really want to show like what it's like when I'm actually doing mental practice. So even though it's just like kind of randomly me walking around, and often I'm wearing those like Ray-Ban Meta like smart glasses. Like, that's what I'm practicing. Like, I guess I didn't write it here, but yeah, often I'll write like what piece it is I'm mentally practicing. So I thought like, is this too weird to show me like practicing with the sheet music? And then even without the sheet music, like I'm just walking around looking at random stuff. But I realized it's not, because I really want to show my real unfiltered practice. So it's like I show myself physically practicing, right? I'm like playing Chopin and playing all those other virtuosic pieces and things that you might have seen me play. But my mental practice is every bit as important as my physical practice, just that you can't see into my mind. So I don't really have much choice other than to either show you, my face while I'm imagining it, or now I think it's more convenient just for me to wear like some smart glasses. And then as I'm walking around, I'm saying like what it is I'm practicing, some of the thoughts I'm thinking, why it is that it's helpful, and so on. And so then you can see my actual experience. Like, yes, while we're walking around Shinjuku or Tokyo or wherever it is that we're exploring, Kyoto, I didn't even share clips from that yet. And I'm wanting to, I'm meaning to. It just takes a little bit of time to create. You can see like, while I'm exploring these beautiful places, if I want to, I can still be making my pieces stronger. And indeed, that's what I did. And it really added to the experience. And the 2 types of mental practice, they really help each other. So it's not just mental practice and physical practice. Under the umbrella of mental practice, I am doing mental practice with the sheet music. And then after I do mental practice with the sheet music I mark the logical notation, I expand the sets. Then when we're walking around, I'm like, let's see how much of it I can remember as I'm playing through the pieces. Every time that I expand the sets, my ability to like somehow finagle my way through the piece gets stronger. So for instance, if you're physically solving sets at the piano, you've solved 4 measure sets or something, 4 measures plus the next beat in each case. Sometimes you can like kind of fake your way through the piece physically. You can get from beginning to end. It's a case with mental practice too, where if you can imagine groupings of like 2 measure sets, 4 measure sets, then later when you're walking around, sure, some areas may be fuzzy, but you can more or less picture your way through the whole piece. And every time you expand the sets using my logical methodology, they will become stronger. Your mental images will become stronger. It'll become clearer. So then it becomes more and more satisfying. So I'm looking forward to walking around or doing cardio or exploring, and then playing in my head and seeing like, how much clearer can I make the pieces? And yeah, even just talking about this just gets me excited, because there's so many possibilities for mental practice that I haven't even tapped yet. And like I feel like I'm just at the beginning of the journey myself, which is exciting for me, hopefully for my students as well too, in terms of what I learn, I impart to everybody. And then after I've pictured it in my mind, if there are areas that are fuzzy, that are unclear, that I'm not able to imagine as well, that informs me, just like performance would inform physical practice. So it's like, those areas were unclear. So the next time I go back to the sheet music at the next coffee shop, at the next hotel room, at the next subway stop, I'm going to go over those areas mentally and make those stronger as I continue to update all of the notation. So then the next time that I'm walking around, it'll be even clearer, and like those weak areas will be stronger again. So that it's a continuous process. They help each other. Obviously, all of it helps physical practice, and then physical practice helps make the mental image stronger. Mental practice obviously makes the physical practice stronger. So anyway, so I was doing all this type of interleaved mixed practice with the music, without the music, all different environments. Pianists are so dependent on subconscious cues in the environment a lot of times because we're like kind of stuck to one instrument. Mental practice just frees you from all of those constraints. You can like play your piece just like if a violinist carried their violin around. I can play it in all different environments under any sort of circumstances, even with like distractions, noises, or whatever it is. So it's quite interesting. And so what I did was I expanded the sets enough that I could, picture it in my mind as we're walking around. I actually did the same with the Bach Prelude and Fugue as well, technically. And although I was able to play those before I left, I wasn't able to play the Dello Joio Sonata number 3, the Norman Dello Joio. So then by the time we got to Shanghai, I played the entire piano sonata in my mind like every day, really. And I'd refined it. I'd expanded the sets with the sheet music a bunch of times. I'd gotten used to playing in all different situations. I could imagine it. But for me, it was, even with everything that I know, it was still a pretty surreal experience, a really special experience for me, because I'd just been pretty much purely away from the piano for 2 weeks. And I'm like, you know what? The first thing I'm going to play is the Dello Joio Sonata. And I set up my phone, I pressed record, and then I just performed from beginning to end, all 4 movements. No stopping. I don't think there was any stopping. I mean, obviously there was faking. Obviously it wasn't perfect. It's just the same as if I physical practice, it wouldn't be perfect. But it was actually shocking, like how much I was able to do well, even, musically, technically, and so on. Obviously I'd refine it with metronome practice and my other methods, my physical methodology. But I've started sharing clips from that actually recently. So let me see if I can find any example of this. Oh yeah. There's a good amount of clips where I'm kind of describing this. So I wrote like, I revived the entirety of this using mental practice. I actually created a bunch of different, at the time of this recording, I didn't upload all of them yet, but there's definitely more. And it's a pretty difficult piano to control the dynamics. Unfortunately, the softs aren't great, but I kind of got better at it as I went along. But yeah, the beginning of Dello Joio, that truly was a cold playing. Like I did not physically practice at all. And so, all 4 movements, all told, went really, really well. And it was just a magical experience because what are the implications? It means that if I continue to cultivate this and become even stronger, like I'm happy, but I'm wanting to get to new levels with both mental and physical practice right now in this year, 2025 and beyond. And I'm excited about being able to travel more with my wife, travel more with my family. I can imagine myself away from the physical piano for longer, for like a month or 2 months even at a time, and just not only reviving pieces, but I know that I could learn new pieces entirely away from the piano as well too. And that'll be exciting to then come back to the piano and then be able to play those pieces even at a rudimentary, like pretty good level. And I do prefer to write fingering, I think I should mention, at the piano itself. I could come up with all of the fingering away from the piano, but it's still safer at the piano. I still want to see like not only if certain things feel good, but also if they sound good to me, if I'm getting the quality of sound, the character of sound that I most like. And so, you'll know, like this was during a time when I didn't write the complete fingering, but it was enough that it was okay for me. Now I would write every single fingering, no matter how redundant. So I would I'd prefer to do that at the piano before I left. So that means for like a totally new piece, like for instance, if I were to learn like a new Beethoven sonata, I might at the piano write out all the fingering, which is like, it's a little bit of physical playing. I wouldn't really consider it true practicing. I'm mainly just trying to figure out like, what fingerings are good to execute. So I probably sit at the piano, take a while, write the fingering for the entire sonata, and that could take, I don't know, a few days or a week, depending on how much time I have to practice. Maybe just a few days, I'm not sure. How long the sonata is. So I have all the fingering. And then if I'm going to travel for an extended period of time, I can be doing mental practice and like using my logical methodology to piece together everything. And the hope is that, I mean, if I want to run it as a pure experiment, then seeing how I do when I come back to the piano. And maybe I'll be able to share some of those results with you guys in the future. Of course, I don't want to slow myself down through that process. Like, I should still be physically practicing other things at the piano, but I'll do some other pure experiments and let everybody know how it goes. So yeah, I hope you found that interesting. Definitely please explore all of those resources that I was talking about if you are curious about how to get started doing this yourself. There's a lot of useful tips in that mental practice playlist. There's a lot of real life examples and I'm going to keep sharing them. I don't think there's enough mental practice content of really, truly doing it. And probably it's because it looks pretty odd, like in terms of the sheet music, like wherever random place you are, in terms of me just walking around. I want to try to normalize it. That's part of my mission at this point, to make it so that mental practice is as natural as physical practice for everybody to be doing. So yeah, so if you found this helpful, please like, subscribe, let other people know about the channel, and looking forward to the next one.